Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Tested or trusted? What data protection pilots actually reveal. And when we say pilot, we mean more proof of concept. You'll hear more from our experts here shortly of what that means. But having data protection in place doesn't mean you can recover when it matters. Today, instead of walking through slides or theory, we're going to use real world scenarios and talk through what actually happens in the field, what works, what breaks, and what teams discover when they put their data protection strategy to the test. Joining me today, I've got a group of experts who each see this from different angles. We have Chris, Senior Product Manager, who focuses on data protection and business resilience. Eric, Senior Solution Architect, and John, our Cloud Engineer. And I'm going to have them each give a quick fun fact of themselves to get us started. Go ahead, Chris. Kick us off.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. I am a senior product manager, and along with that, I have, been playing tabletop role-playing games for about 20 years now, doing a lot of DMing in between there. So,
Eric, why don't you go next?
Yeah, Eric, Senior Solutions Architect. One fun fact about me is I'm a Packers fan from Arkansas.
Nice. And saving the best for last. Go ahead, John.
Perfect. John Holland. The fun fact I've got is in Colorado, I am a certified alligator wrestler.
Whoa. I did not know that. Okay, I have questions. We'll circle back. Um, so like we mentioned, we'll get a mix of strategy, design, and what actually happens when things hit the protection. So kicking us off, Chris, want to shoot this one to you. When you hear we have backups in place, let me use air quotes, what's your immediate reaction based on what you see in the field?
yeah, my first thought is, okay, so you say you have backups. What does that actually mean, right? How have you been designing a backup, either infrastructure or a backup solution, or any of those pieces? And beyond that, how are you, interacting with that? Are you doing a set it and forget it or something, more interactive?
Eric, from a design perspective, what are the most common gaps that create that false sense of security?
So really, there's a couple that come to mind. The first is the retention policies that some organizations come around with. Is average time of ransomware attacks sits somewhere between 5 and 14 days. So if you're only carrying a week of backups, typically it's not long enough. The second aspect of that, outside of retention policies, is making sure you have a clean, immutable copy of your backups offsite. And a lot of the ransomware attacks that are happening out in the world today, they really target those backup repositories. So being able to get a clean copy offsite in the event of probably the worst experience you'll ever have in your technology career is very important to get that clean copy into your environment.
And then, John, when you get into an environment like this, what do you actually check first to validate whether the recovery will actually work? And how often does it actually work the way they expect?
More now than it used to. It used to be when people said they had backups, they just would take like a copy of their file share and then put it on like an external and have it go somewhere else, sit safe on the same site, something. Nowadays, we're seeing more so where they are retaining backups, but like Eric said, they're not retaining more than a week or so. Or they are retaining more than a week, but they aren't getting those offsite backups. Another big issue we're starting to see more of is the bad actors are going after the backups diligently. And so one thing we're starting to also try to look for is to see if the backup infrastructure is tied into their Active Directory or if it's separated out into its own logical area, just to kind of prevent that further access from any sort of malicious actor. But that's mostly what I've been seeing and what we're looking for. As far as how often it works, generally, I think most of our customers' backup solutions worked, but they weren't 100%. Hence, them coming over to us to use our backup solution, right? But for the most part, They checked a handful of boxes, but I don't think I've seen a customer yet check every box within the boxes being the recommendations by the 3-2-1 rule.
Now, let's shift to a real case scenario here for Chris. In this case, the organization thought they were protected from a business standpoint. Where do you typically see the disconnect between perception and reality?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the things that Eric and John have already mentioned, right? Where it's retention periods or having offsite copies, having immutable copies, or simple things like having the space to actually recover into, right? Having extra resources available to your team to do testing or to actually restore data back into or systems back into in the event of, a cyber event or accidental data deletion, things like that. um, Protection is only as good as your ability to recover during an event, right? Having something in place is great, but if you've then maxed out all of everything that you have, just getting protection in place, you're still stuck unless you are then erasing new things as you're trying to recover or having to buy new things and wait on new resources, things like that. So that's what a couple of the big things that you really need to think about when you say you're protected. um how are you recovering?
And Eric, you usually come in at the beginning of the deployment stage before we actually deploy. What are the most common design gaps you see backup and data protection strategies that lead to a situation like this?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's quantity of space. That's probably the most misconception thing that happens. If people think they have 10 terabytes and it's going to take 10 terabytes of backup space, that's usually a very common misconception. We're usually seeing about a 5 to 6x usable space on backups. So that's one of the first things that come to mind. As we talked about previously, the retention policies, and John mentioned that 3-2-1 model. That's really prevalent in the design aspect of an environment like this.
And John, can you expand on that? Once you actually get into an environment like this, what are some of the first things you check to validate to ensure the recovery will work?
Generally, we try to run through a test, whether we're implementing it or they're keeping it in place and we're implementing new infrastructure, but we're not implementing like a backup software, right? Generally, one of the first things we'll do after we're finished with whichever implementation is we'll run through testing, confirm either on a full set or on a partial set, and run through and have some sort of check in place, whether it's a file that they put in a certain folder structure that on the recovered VM we go and look for, or some permission change or something, but some sort of change that we can track as a constant so that when those VMs are on the recovered side in that testing environment, we have that confirmation to prove that it's good to go. And then some of the short gaps that we generally see are that that's not really being done. They set it and forget it officially or effectively. Or they don't feel like they need if it's a new build, they don't feel like they need to schedule time, or there's other fires that are bigger and they don't want to set time aside to actually test it, and they just let it ride. Even though it's not failing, it's not actually grabbing the data, but you wouldn't be able to validate that unless you tested. So then if something were to come up and they go to try to pull from those backups, now it's not truly a protected system because that validation step never happened or has never happened.
And we've mentioned the 3-2-1 rule here a couple of times. John or Chris, do you want to just say what it is so we have it for the viewers that might not know?
Do you want to take it, Chris?
I can take it. So the 3-2-1 rule is traditionally thought of as having three different copies of your backup on two different storage mediums, with one of those copies being offsite. Now, our partner and backup lead or data protection leader. Veeam has since expanded that out from 321 to 32110, which then includes the second one is one immutable copy, right? So making sure that we've got those undeletable, unmodifiable backup copies. And then the zero, and this is a fun one based on everything we've been talking about so far, is zero errors, right? So making sure your backups are running, making sure that you don't run into issues when you're doing test restores, things like that. Um, it's a really important thing that, and I know I think we've, not ad nauseum, but we'll continue to repeat this until the end of this this webinar, is making sure you hit those, man. It's so critical to touching all of that to really put yourself in the most secure and recoverable position that you can be.
So moving along to our second case study here, more on the ransomware front. For John, we'll start off with you. In a real ransomware event like this, what tends to break first? Is this backups, the process, or something else?
So this one is a classic case of just checking the box. So they were doing the bare minimum with their backup posture, their security posture, and they weren't testing anything. So the malicious actor got in a while before. They had a very short backup set. When we restored from backups, we still saw the malicious actor there, which just increased our recovery time. We were able to put it into a clean room sandbox environment where we were able to then clean it, confirm it was clean, and then push it back into production and get them back up and going. But had they gone through and done these practices regularly, it would have sped that process up. It would have also potentially sped up the physical components as well, because those ones got hit pretty bad, and a lot of them had to be bare metal restored, and there wasn't a lot of backups that were working because they did not test at all. So eventually they did get back up and running, but it was months later before they were back up to 100%. I think it took them maybe 72 hours before they were up and at least somewhat running. So thankfully they were at least doing the bare minimum to get that going, but that process could have been substantially faster had they been taking all the right steps with that approach.
So, Eric, how does validating or having a proof of concept would have helped a customer like this if they would have tested and changed the outcomes in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, from the sales side, John kind of hit a couple bullet points that we run into quite a lot. There's a lot of people out there that are just trying to check a box, say, hey, yeah, I have offsite protection or I have DR. But we work with a lot of VPs, CIOs, directors of IT, that if you just plain out ask them, do you think your disaster recovery solution would work? Or what happens if you hit a ransomware attack? Do you think you could recover? A lot of them have not even tested, or they don't necessarily sleep well at night. So one of the things that we're able to do, leveraging, as Chris mentioned, our partner with Veeam, is we have the ability to do a lot of this testing in virtual sandbox environments, allowing you to have the comfortability of knowing, like, hey, if I was infected, or hey, I did have some type of disaster, whether that's software, hardware, geographical, that you do have the comfortability knowing I can spin back up in a disaster. And that's really key to a lot of organizations that I don't feel is getting met a lot of times.
Chris, is there anything you would like to add here, maybe from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about doing these reviews and these overviews and validations and all of this, trying to set customers up for success, trying to set our partners up for success. Um, we mentioned over and over again, testing valid, like getting in there and making sure it's doing what we say it's doing, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a software, right? Software does not always work at a 100% clip. So you have to get in there and be actively involved in it. The other thing that I would say is, when we're designing, when we OTAVA are making recommendations and doing, holistic environment design, we're trying to do the entire environment from the perspective of recoverability and protection. So, when you talk about segmenting networks, right? Setting up the virtual machines in such a way that, you don't have one giant VMDK on it that has all of your data and all of your everything on it, right? Breaking these things down into manageable pieces, and that, again, from the network to the disks to the machines, and breaking them up so that when you have either data loss or a malware event, things like that, a cyber event, um, you only have to focus on the things that get hit, right? You're not going back and having to rebuild from scratch, like John mentioned, right? We get their infrastructure up and running in 72 hours, but because of all of the other things that got hit from that, now we have to spend months rebuilding their business because they just didn't have the rest of the pieces set up in a way to allow them to succeed in that event.
So a lot of organizations seems like they invest in data protection services like backup, DR, immutability, but the reality is that oftentimes they're implemented in isolation or based on assumptions. How would a pilot or a proof of concept, and we can take a minute to talk about what the difference is here, um, could really help with that? Um, why don't we start with Eric on when we say proof of concept, what it means, and then and what does a process look like in a real environment?
Yeah. So, kind of the proof of concept or proof of value, whatever uh, term is most comfortable. Really, what we're talking about is the kind of the testing and validation of the environment that is either stood in place or what you're evaluating to move forward with. A lot of organizations sometimes still view backup and disaster recovery as a cost that they may want to trim down on cost. But one point I mentioned earlier that I want to reiterate is anytime you're infected with ransomware or you have some type of catastrophic event, it is the most stressful time of anyone in their IT career. So being able to have a tested, validated solution that you have a plan on how to recover can help make, I won't say it takes all the stress off the plate because that doesn't exist, but it really helps get the environment back into a workable state in a much quicker manner than just kind of not having a plan. So when we look at this in a real environment, typically a lot of organizations test their DRs quarterly. They can test it, twice a year. They test backups on a weekly basis. There's a lot of things that go into play to ensure recoverability in a timely manner.
Okay, and a follow-up question for John and Chris. What are some of the most surprising things that come out of something like this when teams actually run them?
I I don't know if it's I guess it's surprising with how often it happens, I guess, but the realization of a lot of the customers that I've seen after we implement their backup posture to what our standard is, and just watching what their surprise at how I don't know how important and how I guess how insufficient the previous system was, and then how important the backup system and setup itself actually is. I guess seeing how often that's the reaction is a pretty surprising thing that I've seen from building these out. Because that's generally after we finish that proof of concept is usually right before we finish everything in high five, and that's you can really see that like release from the customer on those calls after that is successful.
I think that's a great call out, man. Just like, what we've talked a lot about, what customers' expectations are going into, from where they were. Uh, and I love the call out on, and then they see what it should be, right? what is the real answer to this, and not just, oh well, we're doing, like you mentioned, we checked the box, so we're good, right? No, no, no. Let us show you how, what a world class and industry leading implementation actually looks like, right? And and here are all the things that you need to think about, and here are the things that you, the customer, and you, the owner of this data, need to consider, and you need to build processes for along the way. That eye opening, and that, like, you know realization of, oh man, we were not ready, so thank you for showing us the light, right? That's a fun one.
I did have one question. So from a sales side, I don't see a lot of this aspect, but like John, what would you say is the biggest lesson learned from an organization just in general? Like, do they not feel like once they go through this process, are they actually feel comfortable that they have a strategy moving forward, or did they realize, oh, hey, I was a lot less prepared than I thought I was? What do you think is the biggest lesson that they learned?
I think the latter. I was not as prepared as I realized I should have been. Because I'd say that's probably the biggest. Is just the scope.
Eric, I want to flip that on you for a second. So when we talk to customers, and so from your messaging, and so Irma from the marketing side, me from the product side, the three of us kind of work together to build OTAVA's message, right? How much do you see that getting through, or how much do customers kind of like, yeah, okay, what like, not roll their eyes necessarily, but how much do they believe you during that sales process, until we get to John and the implementation team and then show them, no, no, really, but like, how does that go for you?
I mean, a lot of it kind of relates back to kind of just want to say us as human beings, right? Until you have like a major injury happen, you almost feel yourself as immortal. Like nothing can go wrong to me until it actually happens. And once you've lived it, it changes everything.
Yep. It's a why am I paying for this cost? I've never needed it before. Why do I need this? And then they cut it, and then it's fate that they get hit almost immediately, and
Yeah.
then they go, "Ooh, that's why I was paying that cost."
So there's a couple different buyer personas that we've dealt with as a sales organization. One is the I've had this happen in the past. I'm no longer, you know,
Those are my favorite.
yeah, I'm no
Sounds like
longer,
car
Zero,
insurance.
yeah, I'm no
zero
longer
pushback
going
on
to
those
kind of
ones.
cheap out on this. I'm going to have the protection I need to protect my business. I forget what the exact percentage was, Chris, you may remember, but it was like 74% or 80% of businesses that don't have this in place go out of business within the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's like, I think it was something for every business that gets hit and is down for longer than a week. Yeah, it's like 75+% of them are out of business within a year, because they just, you know, and this is something we were going to talk about later, but um the the idea is, right, when we keep, I keep referring, and we keep referring to recovery, right? So the whole purpose of having a backup is, how long can you be down for and not doing business, right? How much money is that going to cost you if you are dead in the water doing no business for 1, 3, 5, 7, 10 days, a month? Like, how much, you know, Irma mentioned car insurance, right? How much is that insurance worth to you to pay up front, rather than really pay for it on the back end?
That's kind of that second buyer persona that I didn't get a chance to talk about. And it's never happened to me before. It seems like this is expensive, and then a lot of organizations can't even calculate the cost of downtime. And if you can't calculate that cost of downtime, how do you evaluate, you know, is this solution right for me? Because, if Chris and I went and started a business and, things are going well and then we're down for a week, there's a strong likelihood we're probably not going to be able to resume operations.
Before we move on, Chris, do you mind talking a little bit on this particular case study? This was one that marketing would call a pilot, meaning that it's not everywhere. You know, it's like a small foot in the door. What went well for this? Like, can you just give us an overview?
Yeah, for sure. So this was a customer that we had already been providing cloud services to. We had already been doing a data protection solution for them inside of those cloud services. And they reached out and said, "Hey, we've got all of these factories and all of these plants around the country that are kind of doing their own thing, but you guys have done such a good job with the on-site or the in-cloud solutions that what can you do for us at all of those remote sites as well? Because they've already got their own, on-site hardware, their own on-site backups that they're mostly managing. So we came up with a fairly novel solution using Veeam and some smaller form factor hardware along with immutable storage on site for them. I believe we've got it at one site right now. We're doing a proof of value, a pilot with that site first, and then we're going to be expanding it to the rest of them once we prove, or show them, yes, this is a better way of doing.
Perfect. And as before we wrap up, I should say, we've heard a lot across these three examples. I think it was three of them, and it wasn't random, right? We try to provide them with a plan, try to move them forward so they have some recovery. Here at OTAVA, we have a framework, and I'll let Chris speak to that here shortly, specifically on the undo and recover components. Chris, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Irma. So yeah, here at OTAVA, we've got the secure framework, which is just kind of our holistic way of looking at the way that we provide our services, right? So shrink, limiting that attack surface, examine, being able to pull monitoring and reporting and things like insight, sort of, right? Contain is your preventing the spread of an attack once it's inside that beyond the shrink part, right? So we're protecting at the edge, and then once it gets inside, and we talk about undo and recover, right? So our data protection services, our disaster recovery services. So undoing the damage to any data, right? Being able to recover data specifically in the event that it's encrypted or deleted or what have you. Being able to undo those malicious actions is really critical. And then recover all of your systems, right? Those services. It's not just about the data when we talk about DRAS versus backup or data protection. DRAS is much more, it's about that really quick recovery of a system, getting you back up and running, and then we go shift back to undo, start pulling that data in as needed to fill in those gaps that we didn't get with the DR. Then the last one, evaluate, right? Because like we've been talking about this entire webinar, putting something into place is great. Saying you've got backup, saying you've got DR, saying you've got all of these things is great. But if you're not going back and double checking it, doing, we've got patching and vulnerability scanning on here, right? We testing, doing all of these things to validate and ensure that everything that we've set up along the way from, SECUR, if you're not evaluating it, you're sticking your head in the sand and hoping and praying for the best, right? So that's, all culminating up to that last evaluation and making sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to.
Thanks, Chris. And based on everything we talked about, let's bring this back to what teams can actually do next. This one's for you, Chris, as well. For teams that haven't validated their environment yet, what's the risk of waiting?
I mean, I think we've hit that, several times with a large Acme cartoonish mallet, right? The risk of waiting for validation is really, you never know when you're going to get hit or if you've already been hit, right? There could be malicious software on your systems right now, and if you're not validating your backups, it could be tomorrow, it could be Friday, it could be, over the weekend when your staff is off, that it gets activated and you haven't validated, so you have no idea if you can even come back to work on Monday.
And then this one's for Eric or John. What's the first step to actually validating recovery without disrupting production?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that, John. You can kind of come over the top if I, don't have the implementation side right. But essentially, like, Chris has mentioned a couple times, we leverage Veeam. Veeam uses a product, or one of their parts of their product is called Sure Backup. Sure Backup allows you to spin up and validate that your backup fully restores in a virtual sandbox environment without impacting any of the production virtual machines. And this is big because everyone who's been part of this space understands that backup is probably your most resource intensive time of your resource pool for production. So being able to spin up these resources outside of your production resources and impact anything that's going on during business hours is pretty good, or pretty impactful, I should say.
I think you hit it. I think you hit it perfectly, Eric. The only thing I want to add on is if you aren't able to test like a replicated VM in an environment like a Sure Backup setup, then you're more wrong than those that have not validated. So definitely get on it. Backups help, but they don't solve everything. You still have a drastic lead time for that recovery if you're just using backups and not replication or some form of replication.
100%. And that is actually a good segue for those who are watching this session and schedule a discovery call with us and our team. You will receive a small token of appreciation for taking the time and leveling up your data protection strategy. So I appreciate everyone's insights here today. One of my biggest takeaways was you don't really know if your data protection works until you test it. Does anyone else have a different takeaway that they want to chime in here? No, that's the same one.
I think
Just test it. Please keep testing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
There you
test
go,
it.
guys.
Get tested.
Appreciate it. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thank you for your time.
Thank y'all.